When I think of open world games, the first title that comes to mind is Breath of the Wild, an absolute classic that broke away from the usual Legend of Zelda template to give us a roaming expanse full of things to explore and discover. Once you beat its short introduction and unlock your glider, the game holds nothing back, pointing you towards your goal and kicking you out the door like an alcoholic parent from the 80s. From the beginning, you know your goal is to head to Hyrule Castle and destroy Ganon. You could run straight there and get blocked by the boss himself or the Guardians, but the game is more about exploration, about hunting down valuable weapons and items, discovering new locations and allies, and cooking about everything in Hyrule. Every step you take will prepare you for that final confrontation, but every step also feels earned, because you explored, experimented, and were rewarded for your efforts. As a storyteller building a sandbox story or campaign of your own, Breath of the Wild can teach us some valuable lessons about the value of an open world. Even in this grand open expanse, our hand is still guided. Let's discuss how we can use the inspirations of Breath of the Wild to build these wonderful, in-depth sandboxes that so many storytellers wish to build. We'll try to keep spoilers to a minimum. After all, Breath of the Wild is a game about discovery, and if you've not played it yet, I highly recommend you do. While many of the locations within Hyrule are memorable, the majority of the world's expansive map is just open wilderness. Though you might find some ingredients, ruins, or the odd enemy along your path, these vast areas aren't the focus of your adventure. If you look at a map of Breath of the Wild, you'll see that most areas of relevance are grouped together. These areas of particular focus are your main points of interest. You'll spot places like Death Mountain and Hyrule Castle from pretty much anywhere on the map, whereas places like the Great Hyrule Forest and Gerudo Desert will become far more obvious as you approach, especially once you reveal them on the map. Using points of interest in this way is an excellent method to guide players. Let those points of interest stand out, be visible from the skyline, or, if you prefer a simpler approach, grant your players a map from which they can see any major points of interest from the get-go. In an open world sandbox, exploration and discovery is a major part of the fun, so feel free to hide some of your points of interest for the players to find later. Just remember you'll need some way for your players to find out where it is. Unlike video games, most players won't go wandering through the wilderness in random directions for 10 hours, hoping to find something new. It's also best to use fewer points of interest that are well developed instead of overloading a map with too many. If we look at Breath of the Wild's map, there are 5 major points of interest that relate to the main story, each with associated questlines and dungeons that bulk out each location and make them feel more realised, as well as a dozen or so lesser points of interest, such as villages, where side plots take place. Having fewer points of interest lets you develop those locations into something more memorable. While points of interest are important, if the only point of the wild expanse between each one is to take up your player's time in a generic travel scene, then exploration begins to fall apart. While you don't need to flesh out every mile of your open world, travelling through the wilderness should feel impactful. In Breath of the Wild, these areas between are packed full of interesting tidbits to find along the way. Abandoned villages, ruins, encounters with various monsters. Half the fun of Breath of the Wild is walking in a direction and knowing you'll find something there, even if it's just a couple of ingredients. Because tabletop RPGs lack that visual element, travel needs to be slightly more particular and focused, but we can still use the same concepts. Using something like a hex crawl allows players to travel a region or world while still finding interesting encounters. This way, you don't need to plan the contents of an entire map mile by mile. You can plan the contents of each hex, or even better, build some random tables for what the players might find in each hex. And using this method, you can also utilize the myriad optional rulebooks out there for things like weather patterns, wildlife, and encounters within a hex crawl, making your time as a storyteller easier while still giving your players plenty to find. While the players explore in this way, make sure to reward their time and effort. If exploration just becomes nothing but a resource sink, then your players will avoid it. While if they have the chance to recover interesting items, food, or other resources, then they'll embrace these ideas for exploration and discovery that are so crucial to a good open world sandbox. While Breath of the Wild does let you travel in any direction, it's not quite without consequence. Even the Great Plateau has areas of cold that will drain your character's health if you remain in them for too long, and later on you'll find cliffs that exhaust your stamina, forests that limit your ability to move swiftly, and far more. Enemies are the same. Wander in a direction long enough and you'll stumble upon an enemy encampment, with some enemies being far stronger than others. Travel far enough still, and you may find some of the game's more wicked monsters, like Lynels or Talus, that will stress a new player to their limits. And in a sandbox game, your players will face foes greater than them, whether that be actual enemies or the environment itself. As such, giving your players the chance to learn how the world works is crucial. Your player characters are unlikely to be as clueless as Link. They may have knowledge or lore skills that will allow them to identify how potent a certain threat may be and prepare accordingly. If they are as clueless as Link, and do go up against a threat beyond their capabilities, then fleeing may be the last option. But as a storyteller, you don't have to tell your party to flee if they engage with a tough opponent, nor do you have to hold back with that opponent. Not too much anyway. If you give your group plenty of warning at the beginning of your campaign on what to expect, that there might be threats beyond their capabilities, that retreating is a valid tactic, or that dealing with something outside of just open combat is not only valid but should be supported, then you'll give your players the opportunity to feel both clever at avoiding tough opponents, as well as fearful to go up against new and unknown threats. And finally, Hyrule as a region contains a massive variety of climates and environments, which is one of the reasons the world is so fun to explore. One moment you can be travelling some grand, open grasslands on horseback, the next traversing a pristine beach that looks like it belongs on a holiday postcard. Sandboxes are about exploration, so go wild and build something somewhere amazing to explore. Thank you for your time. This has been Worlds in Progress. My name is Connor. If you enjoyed this video, give us a like, maybe drop a subscribe if you'd be so kind, and have a great day.